Earth Common Council for Tuesday, July 27th, 2021. I see on the board that everybody is present. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item C is public comment period. This time the council president will recognize members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. On recognition by the council president, persons may address the council, first stating their name and address. The council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Anyone who wishes to address the council tonight? Anyone wish to address the council? Third time, seeing no one, we'll move on to item D, approval of the minutes of the May 11th, 2021 closed session and the July 13th, 2021 regular meeting. A motion from Mr. Fire and a second from Mr. Rosendich. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. That motion carries unanimously. Item E is staff updates. One item tonight, the presentation of a retirement plaque to Steve Meek. That's Zep's acting police chief.
I'm going to bring Steve up here for this one. Normally I type things up and I never stick to the script, but just because I don't want to miss anything, I'm going to do that tonight. So I'm more of an ad lib type of person, but when it comes to Steve, it's really hard to describe his career, but today I'd like to recognize Lead Officer Steve Meek for his 29 years of service to the city of Marshfield. His time with the department, he served in more assignments than we can probably have time to list, but I know if you went on CCAP, or not CCAP, if you went on a CADIS, of course he might be on CCAP now, I don't know what he does in his retirement. Yeah, if you went on a CADIS, you would see a list that's probably 2 pages long. But in his time, he served as shift lead officer, special response team negotiator, field training program coordinator, field training officer, and unified tactics instructor. And those are just a few of the assignments that Steve held over his 29 years. In fact, this probably dates me a little bit, but he was my first field training officer, and that was just going on 24 years ago. So in addition to the many assignments that he's held, he was also perhaps the most passionate officer when it came to traffic enforcement. Steve did this for the right reasons. He cared about the community, he cared about the safety of our streets, and compliance with traffic law. Some of you may or may not know this, but some of you may or may not have been stopped by Steve. I know it pains him to know that all those traffic grant overtimes are out there, because he's told me that if he could, he would sign up tomorrow to come in and work some overtime. So with that, Steve, I sorely miss you. But although Steve served in all these capacities, I think the thing that I'll remember most about him is the pride and the importance he placed in doing his job. I remember the things he taught me 24 years ago when I was on field training, and I remember them to this day. He told me to always use my discretion wisely and never compromise my ethics. If I wrote a ticket, I was taking food off someone's table. It didn't mean it wasn't my job to do so, but think about that when I made my decision. Would a warning suffice? Would that solve the issue? So his ethical standards were without question, and I want to thank him on behalf of all the contributions that he's made to the department and the community. Steve would tell you he's not ready to retire. I don't know that Steve ever would have retired, but oddly enough, he's found a new role as a police and fire commissioner, so he still gets to be involved and he still gets to have a great positive impact on the community. Just know, Steve, the impact that you had on the department and the community will not be forgotten, and thank you for your years of service and sacrifice for the citizens of Marshfield, and enjoy your retirement. You have most certainly earned it. So with that, I'd like to give you this plaque.
A shout out to Shift 3 there. Item number F, Council President's comments. Tonight we have an employee recognition. Sean Olson from the Street Department has been here for 5 years, since 8/1 of 2016. My second comment for tonight is that last week, we finally got to open the pool down there, and I took advantage of that along with many other people. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who was involved in that. If I started listing names, we'd be here all night, but thank you to anyone who had a small or a large part in creating that wonderful facility. For you citizens out there, dig out that old swimsuit, shed your inhibitions and dive on in. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. And that's all I have for tonight. Item F, no, that's me. Item G is the council comments. Are there any council comments tonight? Mr. Butke.
I believe I read on Facebook, it's Mr. Turchie's birthday. Is that correct, Dan? Do you know Tom Turchie's birthday today? Of course, he's not going to be here on his birthday. Otherwise, he's always here. But just want to wish him a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Tom. Are there any other council comments tonight? We'll move on to item H, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Any reports from commissions, boards, or committees? Seeing none, we'll move on to item I, the consent agenda. And you have that there before you and have had a chance to look it over. Mr. Hendler, there's a motion to approve and a second by Mr. Fisher. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion carries unanimously. There were no items removed from the consent agenda, so we'll move to item K, first reading of ordinance number 1460, amending section 2.107 of the Marshfield Municipal Code, Ethics Board, presented by Jen Rakeu, Human Resources Director. Jen.
Thank you. So in your packet, you're going to find a memo with the specific changes of the policy and a copy of the redlined policy. We're looking at amending section 2.107 of the municipal code under ordinance 1460. There's really some minor changes to this. The first is really to clarify the terms of the board members and remove the information that's related to nominations by the Wood County Bar as we're creating that committee. The second change is really clarifying the language regarding the review of a complaint that's received by a board and the things that they'll consider when reviewing. The third change is really to clarify the number of days that are assigned throughout the policy to clarify them as business days versus calendar days to ensure that there's no confusion. And then finally, to standardize all references to the board within the policy so that we have consistency in the language. At this time, there's no action needed as this is the first reading, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Jen? Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Item L, first reading of ordinance 1461, authorizing the chief of police to grant a variance that would allow for possession of or drinking in public places during special public events which are limited in duration, presented by Pat Zepps, acting chief.
Okay, this amendment is actually born out of the number of resolution requests that we've had over the past 2 years. Historically, 5 resolutions allowing the consumption of alcohol in public places were granted by this council, and that was just in 2019 alone. 2020 saw a lull and all that stuff. In 2021, the council has already approved 3 such resolutions, with another one on the agenda tonight, and at least one more coming that I'm familiar with this year. So I would like to note that the requesters of these resolutions have really shown an investment in making the events successful, making them safe, and really laying out the parameters of the geographical boundaries where people can go. I'd also like to note that we've had no issues of any kind with any of these 8 resolutions that we've done so far. We've been able to patrol them, we've been successful, and the ongoing dialogue with the promoters has been excellent. So with that, this is just a first reading. In your package, you'll have the updated suggested ordinance. And if you look at sections B, actually I have 2 Bs, so it'd probably be B and C, and then the bottom one would be D. What the variance would do is would grant the chief of police the ability to grant that variance without coming before common council. This really has some benefit because I believe that the chief of police and the department as a whole has an investment in the community, and the last thing we want to see is anything that would be detrimental to that. So I really think that I don't see any problems on that side. Additionally, it would speed the process up. It would save time on the council side and be much easier for the people seeking these types of resolutions to get them without sometimes 2-week delays. So with that, this is just the first reading. I would be happy to take any questions, and the next reading would be the final approval would be at the next council meeting. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Chief Zetz? Thank you,
All right.
Pat.
Thank you.
Item M, first reading of ordinance number 1462, authorizing the lease of airspace over Oak Avenue, presented by Dan Knack, Director of Public Works. And
Thank you. Marshfield Clinic is planning another skywalk across Oak Avenue, just south of their existing skywalk that connects the main building with the east wing. This would be similar in size and appearance to the existing structure, as well as the existing skywalk over Calshed Street. Those two existing skywalks are there permitted via a lease, and the Wisconsin statutes provides a process for establishing that lease over the public street. That process involves approval of an ordinance. The city attorney has drafted an ordinance for that purpose, which is included in your packet this evening. You'll recall at the meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, the council approved the form of the lease, the actual lease language. So the final step in this approval process is to adopt the ordinance as provided for in statute. Tonight is only a first reading of that ordinance, so no action would be necessary. Final action would be scheduled on August 10th. So with that, I'd answer any questions regarding the ordinance or the lease.
Mr. Butch.
Yeah, Dan, I'm fine with that. I'm not crazy about the escalator clause of only $50 a year increase. That doesn't seem like enough to me. You know, and we discussed that, I believe in closed session, the reasons why and such, and I'm not going to go into that now, but at this point, I guess when it comes time for a vote, I wouldn't vote for that reason.
Okay, so the actual lease language itself was approved 2 weeks ago. So tonight is the ordinance. So we'd have to go back to revisit the lease if that's what you wanted to do. But anyway, tonight is no action. We can take that up in 2 weeks.
Any other questions for Dan? Or Hendler?
Dan, I know we discussed numerous issues in closed session last time around on this very same thing. Have there been any updates on the information and questions that were asked in the closed session on this thing?
I'm only aware of the lease discussion, and some of the other items of that discussion were beyond the lease, so I'm not sure that I have anything to add to it.
Well, if that's the case, I would encourage you and the city administrator to find out if there are some ramifications in there, as we discussed in closed session, at the next time around for us. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any questions for Dan regarding the airspace lease? Seeing none, we'll move on to item N.
Thank you.
First reading of ordinance number 1463, rezoning property parcel 33-05225 located south of Green Acres Estates between Washington and Hume Avenues from SR4 single family residential and GI general industrial to TR6 two-family residential, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner. Bryce.
Thank you. So the current zoning is SR4 general industrial. It's a split zoning. The property is split zone, which is kind of rare in Marshfield. But the proposal would be to rezone it to TR6 two-family residential. The property is located to the east of Washington and to the west of Hume. And the city will be potentially creating a mixed-use TIF district for a future subdivision opportunity. The proposed land uses would eventually be likely single-family or potentially some two-family. It was recommended that the city should rezone the property to one zoning district prior to bringing forward the TIF district request. The future land use map identified this area as being medium-density residential, and single-family and two-family land uses would be appropriate in this district. The ideal density is 3 to 10 units in this medium density district. However, there's no official lot layout set yet, so it's hard to determine what the density will actually be. The majority of the site consists of wetlands. Only the northwest portion of the property would be suitable for development. There is a medium density residential neighborhood to the west and to the north. And there's a stream that runs through the property, and that kind of acts as a barrier between the industrial properties to the east and the residential area to the west. Plan Commission reviewed and recommended to approve this request. However, this is the first reading, thus no action is required, and the final reading is anticipated for August 10th. Thank you.
Mr. Wagner, you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bryce, I read an article today concerning affordable housing and the difficulties with affordable housing. And one of the things is we've always been thinking of it in terms of ownership of houses, but it pointed out in this article that there's a tremendous lack of units available for extremely low-income individuals, which would be in some cases apartments or eightplexes or something like that line.
Mm-hmm.
This zoning wouldn't allow that kind of mixed use, would it?
2-family would be the most that it would allow. If you wanted to look into allowing more than 2 units, MR12 would allow 3 to 4 units by right, and then I believe it's 5 to 8 by conditional use. So TR6 would not allow for that. However, you could do duplexes. You could have a 2-flat, which is 1 unit above the other. So that's probably your best bet for trying to increase the density.
If you, as it stands right now, you don't have any plat for this, do you? I mean, it's not platted out for anything in particular.
Not currently, no.
So basically, if the TIF district is passed, becomes real, we can still go back and rezone it.
You could go back and rezone it. The whole intention.
Would that affect anything in the initial setup of the TIF?
I don't believe so, but I'll have kind of Josh take that question over.
Yeah, in a mixed-use TIF, you can rezone things, excuse me, after the TIF is created. In an industrial TIF, you have to have it at least 50% zoned, so that's where we had that issue in TID 12. But in this mixed use, if we wanted to plat it for something more affordable housing or something higher density, we could do that at a later date.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Bryce? Seeing none, we'll move on to item O. First reading of ordinance number 1464, amending portions of Chapter 18, Article 9, Historic Preservation, to give the Historic Preservation Committee authority to review and approve certificates of appropriateness requests, presented by Bruce Heimbrook, City Planner.
Thank you. Yeah, so the city is proposing to allow the HPC, which is the Historic Preservation Committee, to approve or deny COA requests, and that stands for Certificate of Appropriateness. So a COA is essentially a review process in which when there's a historic structure that is on the local district register, we would review any exterior alteration permits. So for example, we just recently reviewed a fence permit. So there's about 10 or 11 properties that this would apply to within the city. Marshfield is also considered to be a CLG, which stands for Certified Local Government. And CLGs must be designated to approve or deny COA requests. So our ordinance actually has not been consistent with the requirements of being a CLG for the past couple of years. We just had this brought to our attention, and so now we're kind of presenting this change. There are several benefits to being a CLG. I listed those in the packet. However, the main benefit is to possibly be able to receive some grants from the state. The HPC has a pretty limited budget, so the more that we could apply for grants, the better off the committee will be. The other change that they're looking to make is to change their official title to Historic Preservation Commission rather than committee. Essentially, all that's doing is just changing the name. There's not any added powers other than being able to approve or deny the COA. It's just that we were the only historic preservation group that was called a committee rather than a commission, so just a minor change. And then the proposed changes have been reviewed by the the Historic Preservation Committee and the Plan Commission, and they recommended to approve the request. This is the first reading, thus no action is required. The final reading is anticipated for the August 10th Common Council meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Council President. Did I hear you say correctly that by it becoming a commission, there would be no change to the role of it? Because that's not my understanding of what a commission is, so I'm just curious.
So in this case, a historic preservation group is not held by statutory requirements for a commission. So all the duties and the actions that they can take are defined in our ordinance. So we'd have to change our ordinance in order to change their duties. So changing the name from committee to commission essentially doesn't really change the powers, except for the additional request of being able to approve or deny COAs. It's a little confusing. We had this talk with HPC over the course of the last couple months, but we had a state representative for the Wisconsin Historical Society who works with CLGs across the state. He suggested that this is a change that we can make and it won't really change. HPC will essentially be an advisory board by nature. If we wanted to give them more power, we'd have to go through the ordinance to do that. Hopefully I answered that question.
Any other questions for Bryce? Seeing none, we'll move on to item P, a request to approve resolution number 2021-49, allowing exception to municipal code section 9-46, paragraph 1, with respect to open container restrictions for the Vintage Snowmobile National Championship Show to be held at the fairgrounds on August 6th to 7th, 2021, presented by Pat Zeps, acting police chief.
All right, thank you. As we've covered on several of these between 2019 and 2021, 8 total resolutions have been approved by the council for exemptions to the open container ordinance. So we have another one of those this evening. The Marshfield Fairgrounds is hosting a Vintage Snowmobile National Championship Show, and that's going to go from Friday, August 6th to Sunday, August 8th. The event will occur at the fairgrounds where alcoholic beverages will be sold on August 6th from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. and on August 7th from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. We have approved resolutions in the past for the fairgrounds because they are not covered under the ordinance, so a resolution is required for that. So with this particular resolution, I'm requesting the ordinance prohibiting the possession or drinking of alcoholic beverages on the fairgrounds be temporarily suspended on August 6th from 11 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. and on August 7th from 12 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. to accommodate the event. The area, as with all the other events, will be monitored by on-duty police officers, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, but would look for your approval.
Mr. Hendler, you have a motion?
I do.
And what is it? Okay, and a second from Mr. Butke. Mrs. Spiros, your comment.
Yeah, I just have a question I was unsure of. So are they drinking still in a small area? Like when they have the fair, they have it underneath and that's the only place they drink, or is it just all over the whole fairground?
It would be the whole fairgrounds, much like they did with the Midway in 2019.
Okay.
So they would purchase the alcohol, but they'd have the ability to walk through the snowmobile show with that beer.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. Is it the entire fairgrounds or just a specific area around the show?
A good question. You do have a map of where the show is, but with this, the resolution could conceivably cover the entire fairgrounds. If it wanted it restricted to the geographical map, that would be at your discretion. But to me, the fairgrounds is the fairgrounds. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, please vote. That motion carries 9-1 with a negative by Mrs. Spiro.
Thank you.
Item Q, a request to approve extension of a conditional use permit, resolution number 2019-30 for the Faber Group development located at 3007 West Man Street, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you. So on July 23rd, 2019, Jeremy Faber received a conditional use permit to allow for a group development in order to develop 4 duplexes on property off of Man Street. And this is zoned TR6, 2-family residential. So typically a conditional use permit has 12 months to begin a project and 24 months to complete a project, unless granted an extension or if there's a condition stated in the conditional use permit. The applicant received an extension last year as well in order to start construction by July 22nd of this year, but has requested another extension. The applicant sent in a letter, so I'm going to read that off word for word. Quote, I would like to request the Common Council extend the CUP on the Manville development another year in order to allow time to construct the project as planned. I've already placed and made a significant financial investment for the electrical service that will serve each property. We just have not been able to build as scheduled yet due to unforeseen delays over the past year that were directly and indirectly caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and most recently, astronomical lumber prices. Things appear to be starting to improve as of late and would like to have the approval in place when we can move forward. So the requested extension would place the initiation deadline for the project at July 22nd, 2022, and the completion of the project would be set for July 22nd, 2023. The recommendation would be to approve the extension for the conditional use permit, Resolution 2019-30, for initiation and completion for a period of 1 year. So as I mentioned, July 22nd, 2022 to start construction, and July 2023 to complete construction. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, what's your motion?
My motion is to approve.
And a second by Mr. Wagner. Is there any comments or questions? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion carries unanimously. Item R, a request to approve a pilot program changing the summer hours at Marshfield City Hall during August, presented by Steve Bark, City Administrator.
Thank you, Council President. If you look at your agenda, you'll see I'll be standing up here for a little while, so I'll try to stay right on track and we can move through these items. First item, as you said, is a request for a pilot program to try summer hours here at City Hall. We all know that summer is short in Wisconsin and a lot of people like to get away on summer weekends. We've noticed, as I think other municipalities around us have, that includes our residents. The number of visitors we get on Friday afternoons is fairly low. That's what's been observed by our frontline staff and others. And for this reason, some communities I noted in the memo that I gave to you, it includes De Pere, Clintonville, Chippewa Falls, Rib Mountain, there are others I didn't go through the list, have gone to a summer hours system where they are only open until noon or thereabouts on Friday. And we discussed at the staff level, there are some benefits in the sense that it's a good benefit for the employees as well to have a different schedule during the summer as long as they're able to work their regular hours. And we think that it may make some sense given our low customer traffic during those Friday afternoon hours. So under this proposal, City Hall would continue to be open from 7:30 to 4:30 on Monday through Thursday. Employees would work with their supervisor to work out their individual schedules, but they were required to work a 40-hour week. They might tweak their lunch times and to fit some of their needs with respect to childcare and other issues, but they would definitely put in the hours required. City Hall would then be open from 7:30 to noon on Fridays. And again, this is a pilot program. My intent here is to try this for a 4-week period. I think we'll learn a lot. We may learn that it's a great success. We may learn that there's some issues that came up that we didn't anticipate, or we may learn that it was not a success. And my intent, if this is passed, would be to bring back a report to the council on September 14th with what we found, if we got complaints, if we had any other issues arise that were concerning. So with that in mind, I would recommend that the council approve a pilot program for summer hours from August 9th through September 3rd for City Hall, with the regular hours continuing on Monday through Thursday and 7:30 to noon on Friday. And as I said, with the employees being required to work with their supervisors to make sure that they provide their work hours to the 40-hour requirement. And that we would work with the communications director, Tom Laux, to get the word out to the public in advance. We'd have a week and a half prior to that to let people know through Facebook, the website, other media, including radio and newspaper, of this change. And again, I would give a report at the September 14th council meeting on what we experienced, good, bad, or otherwise, and seek your future direction.
Mr. Fire, your motion. Motion to approve and a second by Mr. Fisher. Mr. Wagner, you were first up with comments.
Thank you, sir. I have some difficulty with this, Steve, and the difficulty I have with it is it's been pounded into us for years and years and years. And we're not in the business of selling widgets. We're in the customer service business. And our customers are the citizens of Marshfield. And they depend on us for being here during normal business hours when they do that. I think this is a violation of that, and I'm really, really opposed. I think we should be doing things to improve customer service, not limit it. So thank you.
If I can briefly respond? Yeah, I respect that. One of the things we have seen, though, especially with the COVID era that's come into play in the last year and a half, is we've seen a reduced customer traffic in general. I think Friday afternoons is just a greater example of that, due to more people doing business with us online. But I respect the fact that we're here to serve the citizens.
Mr. Witzel, you're next.
Thank you. I too have concerns. My concern is that, as you mentioned, a lot of people take a half a day Friday or a Friday off. And my concern are those people who are doing that and then coming to City Hall to quick grab a permit to be able to do a weekend project, and suddenly City Hall is closed. Now, you did say that traffic is significantly down, so I guess I would have to trust that analysis. There is no change to the expectation of staff working. It just provides the opportunity to, from what I would guess, is more people to take a PTO on a Friday without having to worry about staffing the front desk, as you've mentioned. Is that correct?
Correct.
So no change to working hours or anything else?
No, we talked about other options, for the week in general. We felt this was best. We don't want to throw the citizens off too much. We felt this would be a trial period. And again, like I said, we'll learn from it and see what transpires.
Thank you.
Mr. Handler, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. I too have some concern about this. We're customer service orientated. And as a result of that, the citizens expect us to serve them. And they are the citizens who pay their salaries. And I think that the city has the second highest payment scale to employees in the city. And I think the clinic is down on 5th place. I have a real problem with that. And I think this should have been taken care of by you, Mr. Barg, before it even ran to the council. I'm sorry, I cannot support this under any conditions.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Council President. Just a few random comments. I appreciate what everyone is saying about customer service, but I think you also got to keep in mind that customer service isn't always the amount of hours or the exact time frame you work. I think you can still serve the public within the time frame that city staff is recommending. So I understand the point of this idea of 7:30. What is it? I think you said 4:30. But at the same time, a lot of employers in this day and age are doing innovative things and still servicing their customers and consumers. So I think we need to just take a step back. And I don't want us to make comments like we're not servicing the public, because I still believe we would service the public even with a change in the hours. Second of all, this is a pilot program. It doesn't mean we're going to do it. I actually admire the fact that we're trying something new. I'm not saying that I'm going to support this long term, but I will definitely support this pilot program to see if it works. And I'm going to expect a pretty thorough report from staff to let me know the pros and cons. And I really would like to see what the pros and cons are of this. I see no reason why this should not be approved for just a pilot program to see what it does. I mean, I can tell you, I just read an article recently about a company that gives, after, I think it was 5 or 6 years, they give people in their company 3 months, a 3-month sabbatical after 5 years. I mean, companies are doing a lot of innovative things to be an employer of choice and to retain good quality staff. So I have no problem with trying something new. And if it does not work, I'll be the first one to vote against it. Thank you.
Mr. Butke.
Yeah, as it stands, I wouldn't go with this. I think the timing is wrong. We did just come through COVID. It's still there somewhat, so maybe people aren't out as much as they would be. I think we should get some information now, post-COVID, to see how many people really come on. If one person can't get into City Hall in the afternoon and they want business, you know who's going to hear it? One of us. And you can talk about communication and do your best you want on communication, but I've seen it over and over. Nobody's at fault, but people don't get the communicated version that you're not open. I saw that for years in the retail business when I was in that years ago. You know, you can do whatever you want, and not everybody's looking at computers and cell phones to see what your hours are and stuff. So for that reason, I would be open to it later on if you get some valid numbers once we get past all this COVID stuff.
Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you, Council President. I have a couple of questions. This is kind of a tough one for me, but how would we measure whether it worked or not? What are you looking at to determine whether it was okay or not? Would that just simply be how many voicemails are left by people saying we're not open, or would there be some other measure?
I think that certainly the number of complaints would be relevant, and I would assume, I haven't really talked to Ing and others about this, but we could certainly, we have cameras in the front, and we could get a sense of how many people actually are coming to the door and pulling on it and then walking away. That, you know, that'll give us a sense of how many customers may have been turned away, even if they didn't, you know, call or complain about it. And put that together and get an idea of how many people really tried to do business during that time and how many felt aggrieved about the fact that they couldn't. And of course, the hope is if you did this longer term, which again, this is just a pilot program, that people would adapt the way that they adapt to other businesses when they change hours. But you know, over this period of time, it'll just be to see whether or not we have people who are unhappy and whether or not they felt led to voice concern about it.
Okay, so just following up to that, I'm going to go along with this because it is a pilot program. I want to see how this works out. I'm agreeing with Adam on a lot of his statements as far as employees go. You know, we're in an era where, you know, maybe you can't always pick and choose your employees. It's really tough to get people. If this is just a small, minor benefit, I think, to the employees, and you know, it's not costing us anything, and it's very important that we do gauge customer response to this early closing, if that's what we so choose to do, and reevaluate that if it doesn't work. But I think I'm going to be in favor of this on a trial basis, just to see how it goes, and to hopefully, you know, this is just a little added bonus to what the employees are getting.
Mr. Rosendich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm in favor of it, especially as a trial period. My question is, though, is there any thought in like a skeleton crew where then there's actually people here, but very minimal and rotating it? I know there's lots of businesses in the community that do shut their doors at 2 o'clock on a Friday because they're not having traffic flow as well. But was there other plans that were presented, or was this just the one?
Well, we're just bringing forth what you're looking at tonight. I mean, certainly we could look at other ideas. There may well be employees, especially salaried employees, who are here beyond noon on Friday. I'm sure I'll be one of them. There's a difference between that, though, and having yourself open to be able to have people come in and get dog licenses and the other services. At that point, I mean, we've talked about cross-training here for a while. One of our goals was to be able to cross-train frontline staff so that if the person who does this job is gone, somebody can still issue a building permit. If that person's gone, somebody can still issue a dog license. That's challenging because their areas are not the same. So, you know, you can have some kind of a skeleton crew, but as far as being open to the public to provide service, that, you know, might be challenging.
Thank you.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, sir. This doesn't apply to the library or to Public Works or anybody else. It's just City Hall, right?
Correct.
I'm still adamantly opposed to this. I don't think, Mr. Fisher said something about, well, it's, what it's really about is accessibility. And we're limiting accessibility of the public to the public services. And that's what I'm against. And I have nothing against the staff. It's just, I don't think it's a benefit that we should be giving out at the expense of the public.
My comments would be that I was going to say basically the same thing that Mr. Fisher presented, is that we're not in a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 world anymore. It's spread out from there, and I think it's commendable to look at different options and see if they're going to work. And if it doesn't work, we can always go back to what we were doing before. And if it's better, it's better. Any further comments, questions? Seeing none, please vote. That motion carries 7-3. Item S is a request to approve composition of management team for collective bargaining with the police and fire unions, presented by Steve.
Thank you. I've been served with notices by both our police and fire union to go to the negotiating table once again. Now, again, just to remind you, the police and fire unions are usually staggered, that we don't talk about them at the same time. They do 3-year contracts typically, and they're not in bargaining at the same time. However, I'll explain in a minute why that's not the case now. It has to do with the police union and kind of a stalled situation we had before with mediation. But having been served with those notices, I want to bring forward for the council to look at appointing its members to this team. If you look at my memo, you see that the team makeup that we've used for the past quite a few years, the mayor, which in this case would be the council president, 1 to 2 council members, in addition, city administrator, human resources director, finance director, the police or the fire chief, depending upon what union we're talking about, and then a representative from the PFC who doesn't really weigh in on the wages, but certainly is there in some of the concerns that might come up with things that involve the operations of the department. So last time out, we put out some feeler, and we got 4 members of the council who were interested, which is really great. It's something I'd never experienced in my time here. I was kind of blown away. Ultimately, the council chose 2 members, Ed Wagner and Rebecca Spiros, to serve. That was for the police union negotiations. And I'm not sure how much interest there is now among members of this body. We've had some turnover. We had an election since then. The police issue is still not sure how it's going to play out. I've got some communications going back and forth with the representative. I'm not positive whether we're just going right back into mediation or whether they want to take a step back and resume the process just at the bargaining team level. So I think they were going to talk with their members and even follow up maybe with the mediator. So we'll see how that plays out. And then the fire union is starting from scratch, looking at a new 3-year contract. So it may be beneficial for this body to select the 2 members who've been on, Mrs. Spiros and Mr. Wagner, to continue in that role, since they have some background in the police union negotiations to date. And certainly we need to have members appointed for the fire negotiations. So I put all this out in front of you to see how you want to handle that so that we can get both of these moving forward.
Okay, Mr. Hendler, you have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. I would make the motion to continue to have the present team. That's Rebecca Spiros and Ed Wagner, to continue with the Fire and Police Commission bargaining unit for the balance of the year. Thank you.
And Mr. Butke seconds that. Mrs. Spiros, you had.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Anyone have any comments on that? Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. For clarification, Mr. Hendler, is that for just police bargaining, or is that for both entities?
Oh, that would be for both, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you.
I guess I would ask if both those parties are willing to commit to the time necessary to negotiate 2 contracts. Mr. Wagner.
Basically, I would like very much to continue on because, well, first of all, I've got a lot of experience in this. I've done this for, 30 some odd years, I guess. But especially with the police contract, we're essentially in the middle of it right now. And like Steve said, there's a history there. And I think it would be beneficial for those of us who have a history with how these negotiations have progressed to work it through and see it to the end. So I'd be happy to work it that way.
Any other comments or questions? If none, please vote. And that motion carries unanimous. Item T is a request to approve appointments to a redistricting committee presented by Mr. Barr, City Administrator.
Thank you. I was brand new when I came on board in January of 2011. One of the first things I was advised of is that we needed to deal with the redistricting following the 2010 census. And so I'm working with City Clerk Deb Hall. We looked back at the past and we ultimately appointed a redistricting committee for the city's role in this. And you see the makeup of that committee 10 years ago. It was the mayor at that time, one member from the council, the city administrator, the city clerk, the development services director, who at the time I think was called the planning and economic development director, GIS coordinator, and a member of the citizenry at large. And so we're hoping to get the information soon. It sounds like we will. We need to because we're going to have a short timeline for doing this work. And it's going to have to be a lot more expedited than we went through back in 2011 when I think we had 4 meetings over a period of months. But we want to appoint another committee to start working on this. We're responsible for our part of redrawing lines here in the city of Marshfield. And I'm recommending the same makeup. I did float out an email to see if there was any council interest prior to this meeting, and Quentin stepped forward. He said he'd be interested in serving. We had a citizen member last time, although I didn't put that name forward. I wasn't sure where you wanted to go with that. I'll also add that I've heard from a couple of you about concerns, and I respect those, concerning the makeup of this group, where you'd like to see more, possibly even entirely elected officials on this committee. That's entirely your call. We were following past practice that we believe is an appropriate and a good composition for the redistricting committee, but obviously, like with everything else, it's the council's decision how they want to appoint. So I submit that to you tonight for, my recommendation is what I put on the memo, what I just read to you, and I put this in your hands for discussion.
Mr. Wagner, you have a motion.
Yes, sir, I do. I'd like to make a motion that basically the committee consists of 5 individuals, 3 of which are aldermen selected by the council and 2 citizens, and staff serve as staff. That's my motion.
Mr. Fire, you second that?
I will second that. If it comes up, I'll second. There we go.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Mr. Butke. Comments? Mr. Butke, you're up.
That was.
Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, there are decisions that are made during the redistricting process that I think belong firmly in the hands of the policymakers and not the staff. And basically, I was sort of surprised when I saw Steve's recommendation on this. I served on the redistricting staff for Wood County, or redistricting committee, Wood County. As a matter of fact, I was vice chair. And basically, it was made up of all elected officials. And the staff with Jason Grunenberg, who's still there, as a matter of fact, after 10 years, basically served as staff and chief of staff to the committee, and basically led us through the process and worked it out. And when there were decisions to be made about how various idiosyncrasies of the redistricting laws were to be illustrated or implemented by the committee, it was by a vote, and it wasn't always a unanimous vote. But it was, again, a matter of policy and not an administrative ministerial function. And with the way you've got it here, it's a ministerial function, and I don't go with that at all.
Yeah, and just a reminder that this is what happened 10 years ago, and I think you were on the council at the time. So I was following past practice for how this committee has been put together. It was not my design.
Didn't know how that.
Mr. Fire.
I've been through a couple of these, and I can remember the one back when, I gotta remember who the mayor was. Chris Jockett was the mayor. And it was an interesting redistrict, really interesting. The lines got so, whatever you want to call, it was so curvy that one of our council members said, well, I can fix this. And the mayor said, well, if you're so smart, do it. Well, he did. But he did it right, but he had to have a lot of help. So I've watched how this can go, and my honest opinion is that when you let a politician do the redistricting, you end up what you end up with. And think about it, what we've ended up with in this state, who made the decision, how it works, and it doesn't work. I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Butke.
Yeah, to go along with what Mr. Fire said, I remember that as well. And what happened with that is there was multiple alderpersons that would have to run against each other. And the problem that we had with that was we are elected by the people, not by somebody drawing up the boundaries. And that's what an alderman did back then. And I personally think he did an excellent job to, it was Mike Myers.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And he did a good job and it all worked out. And I think that's the way it should continue to have the elected officials plus the expertise of the city clerk or her designee involved with.
Mr. Wagner, you have
Yeah,
more
thank you
comments?
again. I have to take just a bit of disagreement with my friend, Mr. Fryer. I don't think putting politicians in charge of something like that screws it up. I think it basically makes sure that all the interests are served and worked on, and it's a matter of compromise and a matter of democratic principle that it be done by the policymakers and not the staff. The staff can't pick their own bosses. They can't do that. And they essentially could do it if they wanted to. In the way the redistricting works. You can draw a line and take somebody you don't like me, for instance. You can take a line and take me out of the council if you want, which I think you'd probably enjoy doing. But nevertheless, it's not something that you should have control over. And the majority of the votes on this, I mean, you got one citizen member and one council member, and that's it. The rest of them are all staff. So the policymakers are out voting. I just can't go along with that.
I'll weigh in on this as well. I agree with Mr. Fire that adding more politicians to this is probably not going to be the solution to creating a good redistricting. I think that if anything, I would be in favor of adding more citizens who have that choice to make the redistricting. So I would not support this motion. Mr. Hendler.
Thank you, Council President. They do this in Washington with all those fine people, elected people. And they also do this in Madison with all those fine people. And I don't think we should play the game any different. And I think we have some talented people on the council, and I'm sure they would do a justifiable job to have the redistricting in this nice city of Marshfield without any gerrymandering. So I support the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Bard.
I wasn't here when this committee format was put into place. It sounds like it maybe had been through a couple of elections, a couple of redistricting committees, certainly the one in 2011 at least. But I suspect that the reason it was in a sense to insulate the council from the thought that members were part of moving ward boundaries that would affect them. So I understand what you're saying about the staff. Would the staff have some motivations that are ill-advised? But I suspect by having two elected officials on a committee of 7, it was an attempt to balance balance the makeup in a reasonable manner. I'm not going to jump on the sword about this one. I don't care that much, quite frankly. But I think that might have been the reason why there weren't all elected officials when they first put this together years ago.
Mrs. Spiros.
Could I ask Mr. Wagner to repeat the makeup of his, of what his suggestion was?
Thank you. My suggestion or my motion was for a committee of 5, 3 aldermen and 2 citizens at large, which we could get them by letter of interest or whatever. I could see an amendment to add more citizen members to it, but again, the policymakers have to be there. They have to look and see how they determine those districts were done, how they would determine. You don't cross some of the issues. You don't cross school district lines. You don't cross county board district lines. There are things that you got to look at, and the policy decision is, well, do you expand to the east or the west or the north or the south? And those are things that the policymakers need to understand or need to weigh in on. So that's what it is. Does that help, Mrs. Spiros? Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments? And just to clarify, Deb, could you read back what the motion was?
The motion is to approve appointments to the redistricting committee comprising of 3 council members and 2 citizens at large.
Okay, seeing no further comments, please vote. Wanted to change my vote accidentally. I accidentally hit the aye. Thank you, Deb. That vote passes 6-4. And with that, I will request that anyone interested, either council members or citizens, contact either Mr. Barg or myself, and we'll determine the makeup of the committee. Item U, discuss possible policy allowing for remote participation in council and committee meetings, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. When COVID hit us back in March of 2020, we did not have any provision and still do not have any provision in city code or city policy that actually allows for remote participation, be it by conference call, Zoom, or whatever. But when COVID came, the world changed, as we know, and part of that was a safer at home directive from Governor Evers, and making it very clear that during the pandemic, the preference of the state, certainly the governor's office, was that any meetings held be remote to the degree possible, that people be not coming together and congregating in person, but they find other means virtually to conduct that business. We began doing that rather quickly, and really within a few weeks, we were having our meetings almost entirely remotely. And then as the ebb and flow of the pandemic has gone on for the past, whatever it's been, 16 months, we have had situations where we've had certain people participating remotely, some present. We've had consultants who've also been able to benefit from that, being able to be part of our meetings from a distance. But we've never changed the code or put anything in policy. Well, we're at a point right now when we really need to do something. I've talked to the city attorney about this in the past. We should have something in policy or city code that makes provisions for people to participate remotely. It's not the norm because citizens can't talk to you directly face to face in the same way that they would if you were present. And yet there seems to be a purpose for making that possible. So at the very least, we need to address this, and how you want to do that is up to you. I've enclosed in your packet a policy from Marshfield Utilities that Nick Cum provided to me that provides for remote participation with certain parameters. I think I'm not going to read through it right now, but emergency situations or other things. You could look at people being out of town for work, and a variety of reasons, but at least establishing something in writing as to when we're going to allow it and how we're going to allow it. And I think that would be good for the technology director as well. I know Inge has done a fantastic job of covering these and making this possible for not only council meetings, but all sorts of committee meetings. But I think for him too, it'd be good to kind of frame when we're going to do this, and it probably won't end up being every meeting. So with that in mind, I put it to the body with the idea that nothing needs to be adopted tonight. It's for discussion only, but we really do need to put something in place that gives us the parameters in writing for when and how we would have remote participation in council and committee meetings.
Mr. Butke, you have first comment.
Thank you. I understand, Steve, that we have to put something in there, no doubt about that. But I will tell you that attendance at the meetings got to be way up from what they used to be, because people are able to do remotely. I know on the county, when I was on the county, we had people doing that there. On the Health and Human Services Committee, we even had a gentleman that was in Israel, but he was able to join the meeting. And I'm not saying we should, there might be some wording you want to put in there that we don't want for every little thing, but if somebody's on vacation or something comes up and it makes it more convenient for them to attend the meeting remotely, I'm all in favor of that.
I should have added that this came from Quentin's and Mr. Rosendich's request at the end of the last meeting. I'm not sure you phrased it exactly like that. You did ask us to look into the issue of Zoom meetings, and it kind of folded into this topic that I'd already discussed with the
And I'd be
city attorney.
interested, Q, what your reason was on that.
Well, I mean, I guess this would go back to Mr. Wagner and not want to try the trial period. My resume not be as big as his, but I also know that we're here to serve our community. And so if you're not here on a regular basis, on vacation, I understand there's emergencies that do happen. I can understand that. But I think we're also here to be elected officials in the city of Marshfield. And if you can't be here on a regular basis, we shouldn't just allow Zoom to be able to be an outlet.
Could I follow up, please?
Yes, you can follow up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that necessarily, but it is definitely, we are getting more people involved, whereas, sometimes we had to worry about a quorum in different committees and stuff. And I totally agree with you. I'm a guy that doesn't normally miss meetings, but I'm also retired, and other people get busy and go on vacations. I wish I could, but I got to go along with, I think it's a valued thing. We might have to put some parameters on it. I don't know what those would be. I don't want to work Amy to death either, but thank you.
Ms. Spiros.
Thank you, Council President. For a couple of different reasons, I think that we should continue the availability of at least of the Zoom meetings. First of all, yes, because it gives you the ability to attend whether you're on vacation or whether you're, have two homes and you have to travel a little bit more than other people do. But I also believe that we have, I think that we're going to see some more shutdowns coming with the Delta variant. I mean, I think this maybe is a premature conversation right now because I think, the way that things are looking, this is going to be, if you get rid of it now, we're going to be talking about it again in a month because that just kind of looks to be the appearance of what the direction of this is going to go with this Delta variant COVID illness that's out now. Additionally, the comment of not being able to serve people just because you're not in this room on Tuesday nights is a tad bit offensive. I can tell you probably you're referring to me being gone the most. And I can tell you that I've never not once responded to a citizen who's called my house or emailed me. I've returned every single call that's ever come into my home or email. So I feel like it's still very, very possible to serve your residents. Just because you're not here on a Tuesday night doesn't mean you're not available.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. If you'd have asked me this 2 years ago, I would have been dead against any remote meetings. I haven't been on the council for that long, maybe 5 years, I don't know. I can I think very accurately say I haven't missed a council meeting yet. I've been remote twice because of COVID, not because I was sick, but because in one instance, very few people were here. And in the other instance, there was a possibility that I was exposed. So keep all of the rest of you from getting sick, I decided to stay home. I personally do not find that my attendance remote is effective because I tend to be one who wants to look around the room at the body language of what's happening. And I think seeing the Brady Bunch images on a screen doesn't do it for me. So I personally want to be here. However, I've also seen over the past year or two how effective this really has become, and we are becoming a remote world. I work from home. I have, well, today I had meetings from 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock, no break, and every single one was remote, and every single one had the opportunity for video. Not that we use video on every one, but they were effective. We're still getting work done on a remote situation. Obviously, working is not the same as representing, and I do think there needs to be an emphasis when possible of being here, but I think I've seen some success in what we've had that I could see putting something in writing to allow for, to allow for some occasional remote attendance to meetings, and I would not at all be opposed to that. I'd like to see that in writing.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, sir. I happen to agree with Mr. Rosendish and the fact that the public elects us, and we're pledged to do public service and doing our best to the best of our ability. But the weird thing is, if you say, can you say that if somebody appears by video as opposed to in person, that they're not present? You can't. It's just another type of presence, and I think our whole, I think what Mr. Wetzel says is true. We're becoming a remote world. I think we need to make some provisions so that aldermen can, for good cause, and God help me, Steve, I can't tell you what good cause is. That's up to you, buddy. But
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. But the point is that for good cause, an alderman can request the arrangements for remote viewing of the thing. I think you have to. Personally, I just love getting into these little floor fights. I've done it for all these years. As you know, I enjoy them, Steve. But and I made every effort I could, even during the lockdown, to be here as much as I possibly could, because I do think there's something special about gathering as a group and making decisions together. So. But that doesn't apply to every situation, and I think we need a policy that allows for those other situations.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Council President. Personally, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. I think customer service is not always you have to physically be in the room. I said that earlier in reference to staff, and I'm going to say that again in reference to elected officials. I want to be consistent in my positions, and I truly believe that. Just because someone is virtual doesn't mean they aren't representing the public. In my business, I do a lot of work virtually, definitely not as much as my counterpart over here, but I would say 60 to 80% of my work is virtual. And that started even before COVID, and it's just increased more and more. My passion to my customer has not changed, and it's not going to change. And I agree with some of the comments that have been made. I think we are going to a remote society, and I think the city of Marshfield, as I said earlier, needs to be innovative, and I want us to be innovative in our policy on remote attendance. So I'm honestly kind of flabbergasted we're even having this conversation, because I think we need to be forward thinking, and I think remote work is forward thinking. Thank you.
Mr. Butke.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. We were told that the Water and Light has this already. If I could, Mr. President, could we ask Nick to come up and speak on that, please?
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, the information's in your packet if you want to.
Right, but the policy is.
The policy is.
But how does it work? Yeah.
Usually I have 2 weeks to prepare for questions, so this is, the policy works well. I mean, I think a couple things that Steve hit on a little bit is, especially when we have consultants, we're able to save cost and not having to pay for their transportation. So having that as a provision of the policy, obviously that helps. Recently, we had one of our commissioners who had a family emergency that allowed him to still participate, but still take care of his family. So it's been working out well. I think the administration, as mentioned with Bang and stuff, and setting up a Zoom is a little bit challenging, but I think we're getting used to it, and it's just becoming commonplace to throw that on the agenda and then make it so it's easily accessible for those that want to attend to click in and join us or when we have meetings.
Thank you, Nick. I forgot about that we've used that, Steve, a fair amount of time with consultants and lawyers and such.
We have, Nick nailed it right on the head. We've had people, our financial advisor and others who've been able to stay in Madison and attorneys, who are going to charge us the minute they get in their car and drive up this way. We've been able to do some things with them on Zoom as well that's been beneficial to everyone. I see there's more people to speak. If I can just say one more time, what I ended, I think, my presentation with is my goal is not to try to limit necessarily remote participation. I'm putting this out there, maybe the city attorney can chime in at a point here if you'd be willing, just because we need to have some policy. Right now, we have nothing. And, when the citizens come in and they come to a meeting and they think, well, I'm going to talk to so-and-so, I'm going to call so-and-so out. I just want to know that if there's people participating remotely and that we know why. We can tell them we've adopted something, whether it says good cause, whether it says anything as liberal or conservative, so to speak, not in the political sense, but that we have something to defend ourselves as to why people are participating remotely when we haven't, prior to COVID, allowed that.
In order to maintain Robert's Rules of Order here, Mr. Witzel, you have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see that the recommended action was done at this time for discussion only, but I guess I'd be willing to make a motion for the city to draft an ordinance that could outline some details. We can discuss what those details look like further, but based on information that we already have, based on our past experiences thus far, I'd like to see some kind of an ordinance that can be brought forth for us to look at so that we do get something in policy, some policy moving forward. I am a little concerned, as Mrs. Spiros mentioned, that, we may see another wave. I think there are certain entities that are gearing up for what they're viewing as an October run. I'm really hoping that's not the case, but, I think getting something in writing would be good. Let's get that moving, and that would be my motion. Draft and bring it back.
Okay, and we have a second from Mr. Varsho on that. Mr. Rosen, did you have a comment? Next.
Thank you, Mr. President. My intention was not to eliminate Zoom. I was really just trying to figure out exactly what Mr. Witzel is recommending. It was just wanting to find out parameters.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I understand there's circumstances for people that they need to be Zoom. I get it. I was new to the council and it was automatically Zoom. So I had no idea what the actual background was of it. So I appreciate everybody's comments. There was no ill will towards anybody. I just wanted to find out the parameters were of it.
And so to piggyback off of what Alderman Spiros said, part of what I would look to put into this is basically to streamline that decision in the event that we wanted to call a whole meeting by remote, by leaving that in either the council presidents or mayor or combination thereof. This is a pretty much a trend right now from other communities. I've seen a number of these ordinances modeled and basically trying to take all of this into consideration. And from my experience, this is the COVID and the approach to COVID has changed a lot of aspects of life that are dealing with that electronic participation. And I've tried whole cases with all witnesses within the last 6 months that never would have happened before. You've got due process issues with respect to defendants not being able to confront their accusers, et cetera. And the courts have worked around that to accommodate that. And I think it's a lot more acceptable now. So we'll try to put something together that takes not just if somebody needs to attend individually, but a streamline that, being able to call a whole meeting if the types of events that, there would be a change. I think we can see that as a possibility in the future.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. That motion carries unanimously. Item V, discuss possible change to the no firearms policy at Marshfield City Hall, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator.
Probably getting tired of me presenting by this point. Thanks, Tom, I appreciate that. This was brought up at the last meeting by Councilmember Fisher. Those of you who were on the council back in 2019 may recall that the issue of the posting of no firearms signs in this building was brought up. And the question, of course, being that there's concealed carry in Wisconsin and whether or not we should continue to prohibit weapons in this building, given the fact that there is so much concealed carry in society. At that time, there was a lengthy discussion, and on November 12th of 2019, a motion was made to remove the signs. That motion failed 5-4. So obviously one member was missing at that point. As I mentioned, Councilmember Fisher has asked that this be brought back for discussion. That's why I put it down as for no action at this time. I think you referenced a constituent mentioning this, that they'd like it looked at again. I put section 10-30 of the municipal code in there and referenced the parts that would address this, that allow us to do what we've done. Back in 2019, I was asked by the council to do a survey of the employees in this building at that time to see what they thought. It was very close. It sort of mirrored the political debate you see on cable TV, I think. It was basically close to 50-50, a slight advantage to those who supported keeping the current policy and the signage. But as you can probably imagine, I got comments on both sides of the aisle, some saying that it's concerning to allow weapons of any kind in this building, others saying that the bad guys don't look at signs when they come in if they intend to do harm. So I just bring it to you for your discussion at this point and your direction as to whether or not you want to see this issue revisited in terms of some sort of an ordinance change.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to share a little bit more of why I asked for this. Steve, you're correct. And I actually misspoke at the last meeting. I had a constituent, but I've had a couple citizens ask me to put this back on the agenda and have the council discuss it. And so I wanted to represent those people and have that discussion. I know we had a lengthy discussion back in 2019, and I don't like being the person who, after a decision has failed, tries to bring it back. But again, from discussions, it seems very important to people. So I wanted to do that. But personally, what I would like to see is to have our legal counsel maybe draft a memo giving a legal opinion on what we can do if we choose to do it. And then at a later meeting, maybe in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, have that in the packet and be able to have a thoughtful conversation and discussion based on the legality of if we do it, if we don't do it, what that would entail. So that would be my recommendation on moving forward. Thank you.
Mr. Butke.
Yes, thank you. We don't know if anybody's got guns here now. We don't know if anybody in this building during regular work hours, visitors or staff, has guns on them. Any building that we have no idea. The only thing you can do is if you have metal detectors at the doors, so you're putting a sign up or the sign's put up, and they talk about criminals don't go by laws. So do you feel safe by that? And I'm not blaming our two wonderful officers here, but their back is to this door here. What stops somebody from coming in here and start shooting at us? I mean, I would like to, I don't have one now, but I would seriously consider, I should be able to protect myself or others. It's just, people, I think a lot of people misunderstand that part, that they're split on that. But they think if they make a law or a policy, put a sign up, that everybody's going to go by that. Look in the world, folks. That's not the case. I guess I know our past chief, I think he was for concealed carry. I'd be interested. I might get different thoughts, but I would like to hear from our officers that are here too to see what they think on it. you know, and I feel sorry, this is a little bit off the subject, but they don't know on a traffic stop if somebody's going to pull a gun on. They have no idea. And that's the world now. You know, I just, if we could, Mr. President.
I think I'll put a stop to that, Mr. Butke, of you requesting people to come up and speak.
Why is that?
It's not following the Robert's Rules of Order.
What? Mr. Attorney, could you,
Got me on the spot.
well,
Frankly, the chair is in charge of whether that could happen. You certainly could ask to hear from somebody who isn't scheduled, and that would be your prerogative to ask for that. It would be up to the chair whether to accept it. It's not out of order to do it, but it is ultimately in the chair's discretion as to whether to.
I'll be interested in his vote.
Okay. I'm just saying that it's become a habit for Mr. Butke to
That's the second time tonight.
bring
sorry.
in people. I have no objection. If these two gentlemen want to get up and speak, I will call on you when everyone else is finished here. If you don't wish to speak, that's up to you. Mr. Varsho, you're up next.
So with the sign on the door prohibits somebody in the city that has a concealed carry to bring in this building. So if Mr. Barr gets shot, can he sue the city for not allowing someone with a concealed carry to come in based on the sign on our door?
I think, I'm going to respond to that.
Yes, please.
I think that's part of what Mr. Fisher was probably looking at. Again, you weren't present for the discussion when we first had it, and there was some discussion about the liability elements of it. My preliminary opinion on that is I don't think you can get sued either way. This kind of gets back, and some of the folks have been here a little bit longer have heard me mention this before, but there's different types of decisions that are made that can give rise to municipal or government liability. A ministerial, which is something where somebody just has a duty, they have to carry it out. For example, someone who is supposed to, I'm going to use an easy example because I litigated this, but we decide at this body to put up a stop sign on 4th and Central. At that point, it's a duty of a person at the city to put the sign up. If they don't do it, we can get sued for not putting the sign up. But the question of whether we should have, if we would choose not to put one up, nobody could sue the city for the failure to do that because it's a legislative act. So things that are sort of legislative, meaning decisions this body makes, that is discretionary, there's a lot of things that go into it, the costs associated with it, maybe a choice between one risk or the other risk. And I think that's what you're going to find that this, again, preliminarily comes out to be the same type of situation where if you put a sign up, if we decide to do that and something happens, okay, we made a decision, it could go either way. You could also take the sign down and you could have an incident happen where someone accidentally gets shot. Are we going to get sued for that? The answer is neither of them, probably, because it's a legislative decision at that point.
Mrs. Spiros.
So it's interesting that Brian asked that question because that was what I was going to ask. And I had just read an article probably less than 6 months ago, and it was written, and it was regarding that. It was the fact that that a municipal building had required a sign or had put up a sign that said no guns, what have you. And the city attorney for them had said in this article that that's exactly what she was concerned with, that if somebody came in and brought a gun and started shooting, would there be any liability on the city's part because we basically left everybody a sitting duck with restricting them from being able to protect themselves. So she had actually the opposite concern. She was concerned that there was a liability to the city with having that sign on the door if something disastrous would happen. So that's, since Adam had asked you to, come to us with some form of legal opinion regarding that, I guess that's what I was looking for also in reference to the article that I had read.
Mr. Fisher.
Well, I'm going to muddy up the waters because I would actually like to hear from the chief. I know you denied that. So I'm going to request that the council decide if we want the acting chief to come up. That is appropriate.
I'm willing to, if he's willing to give his opinion, I was just saying that I want, I think is calling people out to be putting on the spot is a little unusual.
Well, it's happened.
But Chief, if you want to come up and make an opinion, that's fine by me.
I think thank you. The first, I mean, I value the fact that you value my opinion, and I am cognizant of my back to the door. I always am. I don't like that, but that's why you generally see me with this on, and I'm sure, if somebody gets me, Travis is pretty quick yet. So, unfortunately, what I can give you, it's only an opinion. Our job is to enforce if there's a violation that happens here. I think what you're talking about is twofold, and again, this is my personal opinion. Are you doing this out of born of your own safety that, like Mr. Butke said, that you would like to have the option to protect yourself? Or is it more of a risk management to try to prevent somebody who coming in here who might see that and not take that action? I don't think anybody knows that, and I don't think that there's a sign that's going to prevent that. What it boils down to on our part is risk management. So ultimately, I do believe it's up to you as far as concealed carry. Again, a personal opinion. I have not met very many police officers who are not in favor of concealed carry. I have not generally in my career, and I cannot speak for other police officers or communities, seen problems with people who have concealed carry permits. So I don't know the extent of that solves what your concerns are. So I don't know that it's an easy decision, but I don't know in the grand scheme of things that it really gets you to where you want to be unless you have a self-interest in carrying concealed to protect yourself from somebody who might come in here. So I don't know if that helps you, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Travis, but that would be my 2 cents on that.
Okay, Mr. Wagner's now.
Thank you, sir. The way I see that, well, we got two issues to deal with here. One is that there is a state, I think it's a state law, that you can't carry a gun in a courtroom. And we do use, and there is a municipal court in here. So there would have to be something, even if we take the sign away, there's got to be some notification about that. And that brings up the second problem is, how do you enforce it? Do we have to have a bailiff here to make sure that there is nobody carrying a gun in and that sort of thing? And if so, are we willing to do that? I think those are issues we need to discuss, but I don't know. I don't have an answer for it, and I don't know if we're safer carrying guns ourselves or having somebody in the room who has a gun, except I was told once that if it was somebody that came in with the intent to shoot up this council chamber right now, the first one he'd look at is you, Steve, because you're armed. So take out the threat first, right? Okay. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think we have to take into consideration and think about, so.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. In reading through the ordinance, it doesn't sound like removal of the sign would require any kind of ordinance change. Essentially, if I'm reading this through correctly, it's our decision whether we not have a sign on a door or not. If it is signed, it's prohibited. If it's not signed, it's not prohibited. I think that's pretty simple. I found it kind of interesting as I saw our acting chief stand up and walk to the podium with his sidearm. And I thought, we're debating whether or not individuals are allowed to have a gun in the room with a sign that says no guns in the building, and he's walking up with a gun on his hip. Now, obviously, he's an officer in uniform. Are there exceptions to the no guns in a building when a sign is up? Are there exceptions? A uniformed officer is an exception. Are there other exceptions? Are there other people that potentially can come into this building with a gun, even though it's signed? And who would those be?
Active military personnel employed by the government. So someone who's on active duty is allowed by statute to do that.
Retired officers?
Yeah, retired officers are another exception. I think that's the three, law enforcement officer, retired law enforcement officer, active duty personnel.
Okay, so there could be multiple people right now in this room with guns. Thanks.
Yes, I am legally allowed to carry a gun in most anywhere that I'm authorized to. There are a few exceptions, but anywhere in the United States. And generally, I try to avoid places where I feel I need to carry a gun, so usually I don't carry a gun. Any further comments or questions, Mr. Barr?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Councilmember Witzel said. Yeah, I mean, I referenced the fact that we stand on that ordinance in terms of posting it, but the ordinance doesn't need to be changed. We just have to make the decision if you want to do it at some point to remove the signage and that restriction. The ordinance just gives us the authority to post as we see fit to prohibit that type of activity.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Council President. I would still like to see this at a future meeting, and I'd still like to see something in writing from our legal counsel on, and then I would like to have further discussion. If I need to, I will.
I don't know that we need
I think unless you have an objection, I don't think we need to go through that. If you were to call me up and ask me to give some kind of a legal opinion on this issue, I think by our own code, you're authorized to do that. So unless there's really an objection, I think that you're okay. We don't need that. It doesn't seem like there's any question about it.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll move on to item W, and Steve can sit down. And we'll bring up Josh to discuss possible ordinance change to allow chickens in the city of Marshfield.
Thank you. I've been waiting for this meeting for about 11 years. Last time this was discussed thoroughly was back in 2010, 2011. And at that time, we had a Sustainable Marshfield Committee. That group was interested in allowing what we called backyard chickens at the time. And that was kind of a movement for a lot of communities to allow for those backyard chickens. And there's a lot of conditions or provisions in those ordinances that address that. Typically, they require that you can only have hens, you have to have so many of them, or you can only have so many of them. You can't have a rooster, you can't do any butchering, you have to have a coop and a play area, and there's provisions for getting a licensing for that, and sometimes you have to get letters from your neighbors and so on. Our current licensing chapter 9, does allow for chickens in outlying areas. It doesn't really define outlying areas other than it says it has to be at least 200 feet from a residential dwelling. And we may have some in town, but nothing in more of a residential setting. Additionally, since we reviewed these back in 2013, our zoning ordinance was amended, and we no longer allow them outside of the RH 35 district, which is essentially our agricultural district. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at a chicken ordinance. It seems kind of simple, or should be simple, but you'd be looking at changing multiple chapters, multiple provisions of the code. You'd be dealing with probably 3 different departments that would have to deal with enforcement, such as zoning, licensing, and the clerks, and then also possibly ordinance and PD. I talked to Bob at PD, he said he doesn't want to do it, but it's still something that we would have to address. So basically I'm bringing this back to the council for discussion, resurrecting it after 10 years. We did spend considerable staff time on it. I think it was about 9 months that we went through, brought it back to council a couple times, had a number of iterations. Our last iteration had a sunset clause, so it would have expired on its own in 2 years. We had a lot of restrictions and limitations, and we still didn't pass it ultimately, but certainly open to whatever the council's direction is. We would work through that, but it's not a simple fix. There's a lot of sections of the code that we'd have to sift through because there's different references and things like that. So it would take some staff time to put together a comprehensive ordinance that would address this. So I think you've seen other communities have it though. We wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. I think Wisconsin Rapids is one example, but there's a lot of communities that we could borrow from with their ordinances and incorporate something. It's just, like I said, there's a number of provisions that would have to be addressed, and it would take some time. So with that, we're looking forward to any comments or dialogue or direction from the council on this issue.
Mr. Butke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to get blamed for this because last time I brought it up, a couple of citizens brought it to me. not this time. But I will support it. I understand some of the problems Josh has said, but other communities do have it. So whichever way the vote is, let's vote on it when the time comes and put it to rest one way or the other.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Council President. I'm also to blame for this one. Since coming on the council in, 2018, I think it was, I never thought chickens would be the issue that I heard the most about, but I do, surprisingly. I have had a lot of people talk to me about chickens on a regular basis. So I guess it's a passionate issue for people here in Marshfield, and I want to respect that. And so the last time it came up, I agreed to bring it to the floor and ask for discussion. I'm just going to say this. I personally do not have a strong position on whether or not to have an ordinance, but I tend to by nature not want to restrict people from doing what they freely want to do on their property. And so as long as there are certain regulations, I don't know what all the regulations would be, Josh, but as long as there are certain things like fencing or different things, even some of the things that I know the ordinance officer emailed us. I think those are things to consider, but I would definitely be supportive if someone in the city wants to have chickens. I let them have chickens. So I would like to see us put this to rest, and whether that's a vote against, if the majority says no. But I'd like to see us not just discuss it. I know not too long ago, Alderman Butkey brought it up and it was discussed, but no action was taken. I would like to see some action. I'm assuming we will want to see some work before we vote on something. So I know that's going to take staff time. And but I think for the public wanting to see this, we need to do our due diligence. And see something in writing and make the appropriate decisions. Those are my thoughts.
Mrs. Spiro.
Thank you. I personally hate birds. I have a fear of them, an abnormal fear of them, actually. So I hate chickens. I hate them. But with that said, the urban farm is becoming something very popular with 20-somethings, 30-somethings. They don't, they want to have control over what their chickens are being fed and the eggs that they're eating, thus from their chickens that they produce. They're growing their own gardens. They're working with, GMO products, and they don't want their chickens fed GMO products, all this kind of stuff. There's lots of reasons, primarily centered around health reasons is generally what their thought process on the urban farm is. So with that, I would be in favor of staff putting together an ordinance for our consideration that would allow chickens with restrictions, obviously. And I think it's really important if we do go that route, that there be something listed for people who don't follow the ordinance, that they get their chickens removed. I don't know, you remove their chickens. I don't know where you would put their chickens after you remove them. Mr. Wagner, do you have anywhere in mind?
No.
Oh. Okay. So anyway, that would be my suggestion, because I think this is an up and coming thing. And again, like Mr. Fisher said, I tend to not want to restrict people in their freedoms. And if they want to, feed their own chickens and have their own eggs, then so be it in a, some kind of controlled environment.
Mr. Fire.
10 years ago, I was one of the three that voted for this. And I thought that we'd get it, but we didn't. And I have to honestly tell you that this has been an issue that's just been dormant for 10 years. I haven't heard anybody says, well, why haven't you brought back the chicken issue? I've always thought that, I'm back in those days, I said, yeah, I think you can have chickens. chickens aren't the cleanest thing to have. They're a problem. You've got to maintain chickens. It's worse than dogs and cats. You have to clean up after them a lot. And I look at the people up and down the avenue that walk their animals and think about it. A lot of them don't clean it up. So, you've got another problem. That is a problem. So, I can honestly tell you, no matter how this goes, I'm not going to be in favor this time for chickens. I have 2 grandchildren in California that raise quite a few chickens. And if you want to ask them, it is work. You have to stay on them. You have to feed them, and you have to be real good to a chicken. You'll have a problem if you're not. Like Becky says, they will go after you. They can be a mean animal if you don't feed them right. So I think that most people don't understand what having chickens are. And be what it is. Let's run it through, but let's put it to bed once and for all.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm probably going to regret this, but I haven't heard a thing ever except from Mr. Butke and Mr. Fisher. So, so thank you for bringing it back. So I guess if there's constituents or people in my district that have concerns, please call me because I have never heard it. And I've lived in Marshfield almost my whole life. So this may be a new up and coming thing, but I think maybe we need to run the gamut, but it seems like a lot of work for 9 months, I think it was the last time, for our staff to do again. So they might be able to do something else with their time other than look at chicken research, I guess. So, so again, I might regret that because I'll probably get a lot of emails and phone calls now, but thank you.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have heard a lot of comments.
Let's be that side.
Yeah, I don't know. I've just told them, well, it's an ordinance. We talk a lot about wanting our community to be a community that people want to live in. We hear a lot about how do we get the 20-somethings? How do we get the younger generations? How do we get people interested in coming here? Our population is aging. I think it's probably partly due to the large employer in the northwest corner of the city that makes this a very appealing community for retired folks. But, if we really want to make this an appealing thing, and if this is really truly a desire, I have a couple gardens, I'm growing tomatoes and whatever else too. If this is something that's appealing, it's going to bring in a more diverse population because, hey, they can do the things that they want to do. I'm all for that. And then I can let those people that have asked me about chickens know that we're going to do it. Thank you.
I'll just make my comments first, Josh. I did speak with Bob Larson from the ordinance department. I sought him out to ask him about this. And he does have some valid concerns about things like, well, for instance, there may be a group of people that are going to follow all the rules and keep their chickens neat, keep their chickens in their pens and that. But there's also going to be, as with anything, there's going to be another group of people who let the chicken waste accumulate to the point where it bothers their neighbors. They're not going to take care of their animals, and they're going to push the rules by trying to bring in a rooster. So there are going to be people that violate the rules as well. His concern is, what do we do with stray chickens? What do we do, if we have an ordinance that says that we can confiscate chickens from people? What do we do with those chickens? So there are a lot of things that we need to consider, and he stressed that if we do go down this road of approving this, that he suggested Wisconsin Rapids ordinance as being a very good one, but that we have a very strong and strict ordinance regulating who can have chickens, how many chickens they can have, the types of care that they are required, and that all be spelled out in an ordinance that is then determined who's going to carry out that ordinance as well.
Yeah, you hit it on the head, kind of what I was going to address, because I did have a conversation with Officer Larson, and basically that, and, we don't have a maps for chickens. There's not a place to take them. And what do you do with confiscated chickens or loose chickens? But also it does create a potential additional nuisance or animosity amongst neighbors. So you've got to deal with that where, especially if you require letters to be signed and everybody has to sign off on allowing their neighbors to have chickens and somebody won't. We already have a lot of neighbors that don't get along, but there are pros and cons to this. I'm not trying to just paint this as a bleak situation. So we're happy to put together an ordinance with the different provisions that I think would protect us as much as we can and go forward.
Mr. Fisher, you have one more.
Thank you again, Mr. Council President. I understand what you're saying, Josh. I understand what other people are saying. But I do think we're making it sound a little bleak. I mean, quite frankly, you know, neighbors might get upset with dog waste. Neighbors might get upset with, you know, the tree hanging over the fence line. So there's to simply say, well, this could become a big issue. Anything could possibly become a big issue. I do go back. I think Alderwoman Spiros mentioned this, or maybe it was, I'm forgetting who said it, but someone I think on this side made a comment about just really kind of urban farming. And I'll be honest, I have a client that I work with in the Milwaukee area, and that is becoming very, very big. Even micro farming is huge, where they're growing their own produce in inner city Milwaukee. And certain neighborhoods are getting innovative in starting their own grocery stores, neighborhood grocery stores, where they're using the produce and the eggs from the chickens and selling it in those stores. And people love it. And so, again, it's not a big issue for me personally. I think Steve made the comment earlier he wasn't going to die on the sword. I'm not going to die on the sword either, Steve. But at the end of the day, I see no harm in putting together at least some preliminary ideas of how this could work. And I would like to see staff do that. And I'm not saying you have to bring it back in 2 weeks. Maybe it's 2 months. But in your time, bring some ideas back, put it on paper. You know, get ordinance at the table. Josh, you're at the table. I would get legal opinion, what we can do. Other cities are doing this, and bring it back. And I think, again, as many people have said, I just think we need to cast a vote. And if it is a no again 10 years later, that's fine. But I think we owe it to, I know you're saying you're not getting anybody, I'm getting a lot. I would like to be able to say to them that we've done our due diligence and we have heard them. And I'd like to, even if it's a no, respectfully say it's a no, but you have been heard and we have addressed your concerns. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions on the chicken? Seeing none, we'll move on to item X. Consideration of allowing Lee Taylor to remain on the airport committee, presented by Alderperson Ed Wagner.
Thank you. The Airport Commission, our committee, asked me to bring this to the council. Lee was appointed to the Airport Committee back, I think, in 2018 by then Mayor McManus. And Lee has since moved out of town. According to the code, we can ask for an exception to keep him on. By the way, moving out of town would have disqualified him from membership on the committee. So, but it says that if the person possesses certain skills that the committee finds hard to replace, then they can ask for it by a 2/3 vote of the council for him to be reinstated on the air, or confirmed again on the airport committee. Lee is a A&P mechanic. That's an airframe and power plant mechanic who he works on a jet at the airport, and they're stationed at the airport, and his skills and his knowledge of what our needs should be and how the airport can respond to those needs for the maintenance and repair of aircraft is valuable and important to the committee. And the committee has asked me to present that to you and ask for you to vote in favor of keeping Lee on the committee.
Fisher, you have a motion.
Yes, I am going to make a motion to allow the continued appointment of Lee Taylor to the airport committee. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Rosendich. Is there any further discussion on that matter? What is the term of his appointment?
I think it's 5 years. I think he's got 2 more to go.
More to go? Okay,
3. It is 3.
3 years. So, said 18, 19, 20.
So he'd be up
Was he
again
just, I don't know if he was just reappointed.
I'm not sure when he was appointed, but airport committees are 3-year terms.
Any further questions? Seeing none, please vote. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Item Y, adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statutes 19.85, paragraph 1E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons are involved. In this case, possible bid to acquire surplus equipment, and adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 1985, paragraph 1C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically the city administrator's performance review. Entertain a motion from Mr. Witzel to go into closed session, with a second by Mr. Fisher. Please vote. All ayes, and we're in closed session.